here we are back in the shop. I'm going to be forging a few knives today. I've got 2 railroad spike knives that I'll be working on, and then I've got one that I'm really excited for. It's a 7-inch bowie I'll be forging out of ADCRV2, and this is for a Marine that I served with back in the day with 3.5. So I'm super excited to make it for him, so let's get to it. Alright everyone, you're not going to believe this, but I screwed up one of these knives. This railroad spike knife, I was cleaning up on the grinder and I realized that I had made the handle portion way too long. So it's probably about 1 inch too long where you could slide your hand back and forth on the handle. And obviously the blade is about 1 inch too short. It's probably only about 2.5 inches or so. And I'd really like these to be around 3.5 to 4 inches. So what that means is I'm going to forge a new railroad spike knife for the customer that was going to get that one. And I'm going to turn this knife into a test knife so I can do some performance testing with a railroad spike knife. Just about every other YouTube video I've seen about railroad spike knives, they all have the standard disclaimer about how crappy the steel is for railroad spike knives. And yeah, there's some truth to that. It's definitely not going to perform as well as high carbon steels that you might use for making knives like 5160 or ADCRV2. But I'm not really exactly sure where on the spectrum of your cheap, crappy Walmart knife versus several $100 custom knife. I'm not exactly sure where the railroad spikes fall. So I want to do some testing. I did a video in the past where I did some tests on a 5160 blade that I forged. And I'm going to do those same tests with this railroad spike knife, and then I'm going to break it and see how all of that goes. And then I think that'll give me a better idea of really how novelty versus useful a railroad spike knife is. So stick around for all of those performance tests. Those are always fun to watch. We'll see how this goes, and I'll get to it. Alright, so here's the first test. I got a block of cherry wood here, just to show you the kind of edge that I've got. These are pretty sharp. They're stropped up. I took it up to, I think a 600 grit is what I took the secondary bevel up to. So I'm gonna baton it through this cherry block and see where we get. There you go. That's pretty impressive. I don't really see any major deformation on the blade. I mean, the bevel actually looks really nice. There's no rolling or anything. No chipping or anything on the blade. The bevel, I mean, still looks like, I mean, it's kind of dirty, but other than that, it looks great. You can see there's a little bit of drag on some of these cuts. I think that's kind of impressive for a railroad spike knife. Alright, so the next test, the famous Christmas tin. I'm going to stab this into this Christmas tin. This is the same Christmas tin I used for the 5160 test, so I'm going to use this blade, stab it through there. I gotta say, I'm super impressed with how well it did batoning through this cherry wood, and this literally took no deformation whatsoever. So I'm kind of surprised, actually. So let's get to stabbing through this Christmas tin. Well, I've still got a tip. It does look like the very point is slightly rounded over now. You can see the edge really hasn't taken any kind of damage. There's not really any rolling or chipping. I'm not sure if you can see in the camera the tiny rounding of the tip that you can see. It's really subtle. All right, so for our last test, I'm gonna be cutting through this 1/2-inch hollow tube, copper tubing. In my last video, I used 3/8-inch tubing. This is all I have now, and I don't have very much, so I'm only gonna baton through it maybe once or twice. So. All right, made it through the tubing, no problem. Oh, it looks like I did actually get a little tiny bit of rolling on that one. I can see a little bit of edge deformation, no chipping, not too bad. All right, here we go. It's time to break the knife. Man, that's kind of a bummer. I broke it clear up here by the handle. I don't know how good of a test that really was. I really should have moved it up, and maybe I can try breaking it again up higher on the blade. Just looking with my naked eye, it looks like the grain is pretty fine. I'd be curious to look under some magnification and see how it compares to some of the pictures I took of the 5160. Anyway, I think this was all informative. All in all, I'm kind of impressed with how I'm pretty impressed though with how a railroad spike knife held up. I mean, if I could choose, I'd take a 5160 blade or a 80 CRV2 or something, or even 1084 over a railroad spike, but I gotta say I'm kind of impressed with how well it did. I've got to say, I am pretty darn impressed with how that railroad spike knife performed in all of those tests. I really expected to see some edge deformation or rolling, especially when batoning through that cherry wood, and you could hardly even tell that the knife had cut anything. The fact that I could cut paper after batoning through that cherry wood was really surprising. I think that I probably could have stropped that maybe 5 or 10 times and it would have been right back to shaving sharp. After breaking that knife and looking at the grain structure of the steel, it looked a little bit large or coarse to me. So I think I would add 1 or 2 normalization cycles prior to quenching. And then I would also reduce my quench temperature slightly. I think I was a little bit too hot with these 2 knives that I heat treated. So based on the tests, I don't think I would add any kind of tempering still. Based on taking a little bit of rolling or glinting on the edge during the copper tube test, and given that I got pretty good flex when breaking the knife, I don't really know that I need to add tempering, and I wouldn't really want to soften the edge anymore given that it took some glinting off a copper tube anyway. All in all, I think people might be a little bit hard on railroad spike knives, and I don't know that it's fair to call it just a novelty knife. A well-made railroad spike knife will probably outperform a lot of the cheaper manufactured knives you might pick up on like Amazon or at Walmart. Hopefully you learned something in this video. Thanks for sticking around all the way to the end. I really do appreciate it. In my next video, I will get the other 2 railroad spike knives heat treated, and I'll probably start forging in the 7-inch Bowie knife that I am so excited to make. If you follow me on Instagram, you've probably seen a sketch of the knife already, and I think it's gonna be awesome. This is one of my favorite style of knives to make, and I'm putting a few twists on it that I've never done before.